The mess hall at Forward Operating Base Kestrel was alive with the usual chaos. Soldiers clattered trays across metal tables, boots thumped against the concrete floor, and laughter echoed from every corner. The aroma of reheated food, burnt eggs, coffee, and something vaguely like chili mingled with the dust of the surrounding desert. Conversations overlapped in a cacophony of bravado and idle gossip. Patrol stories were traded with animated gestures, each tale taller than the last. It was the kind of environment that separated the confident from the timid, the outgoing from the invisible. And in the far corner of this chaos sat a lone figure, quietly observing it all. She wore standard-issue fatigues, sleeves rolled neatly, boots polished just enough to meet regulations. A simple tan t-shirt hugged her frame, her posture erect but relaxed, shoulders squared yet unassuming. Her helmet sat on the bench beside her, untouched, as if she were a soldier in transit. Yet there was a presence about her, a subtle, unspoken authority that made the air around her feel heavier, like the calm before a storm. Her name, unknown to anyone in the mess hall, was Chief Petty Officer Dana Rivers, and today she was just the quiet girl in the corner, unnoticed by most. But even the most oblivious eye could detect something different about her. She didn't fidget, didn't laugh loudly to fit in, and didn't glance nervously around the room. Every detail of her behavior screamed control. How she held her fork, the measured pace at which she chewed, the way her eyes scanned the hall with quiet awareness. It was that stillness that drew attention. 5 soldiers, younger than 25, clustered at a nearby table, eyes flicking to her more than once. Their leader, SGT Collins, was a tall, boisterous man whose ego was only slightly larger than his rifle. Beside him sat 4 of his closest buddies, each smirking, each eager to make someone their target for amusement. "She looks lost," one of them muttered, nudging another. "Think she knows she's in the right place? Logistics, maybe?" Another replied, his grin widening. "Or a medic. Maybe she carries bandages." Collins leaned back in his chair, scanning the hall, then fixing his gaze on the quiet stranger. He tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "Looks like someone forgot to tell her we don't babysit," he said with a chuckle. His friends laughed, a little too loud, drawing eyes from nearby tables. The woman in question didn't flinch. She continued eating, her fork cutting through eggs with precision. Her brown hair was tucked behind her ears, and a faint sheen of sweat suggested the midday heat outside had touched her, though she made no move to wipe it away. Her eyes, however, were far from idle. They swept the room in calculated arcs, noting movements, patterns, even the slight shift of a chair 2 tables over. One of the soldiers whispered, almost to himself, "She's not saying a word. Bet she's scared." A ripple of laughter followed, a mix of mockery and disbelief. Collins, sensing an opportunity for entertainment, leaned forward, placing a hand on the edge of her table. "Mind if we join you?" he asked. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. She looked up for the first time, her gaze calm, unshaken. Her eyes were a soft brown, almost warm, but behind them lay a razor-sharp focus that betrayed her military training. She didn't answer, didn't invite them, didn't flinch. She simply continued eating. The silence of her defiance was almost louder than any shout. "Hey," Collins said, louder this time. "You new here, or just pretending to eat like everyone else?" Still, she didn't react. One of his friends snorted, leaning in closer, peering at her tray. "Probably doesn't even know how to use a knife and fork properly." The words were meant as a joke, but they carried the weight of provocation. The woman's fork paused mid-air, her hand steady as stone. The soldier's laughter faltered, sensing, almost subconsciously, that something was off. The air between them thickened, electric and tense. She did not speak, but the room seemed to hold its breath. Another soldier, bolder than the rest, tapped her shoulder. Lightly, he thought, testing her response. He laughed nervously. Come on, don't be shy. Her head lifted slowly, deliberately, meeting his eyes for the first time fully. And in that gaze, the soldier saw something that froze him cold. The confidence of someone who had faced fear and won countless times. The discipline that comes from surviving environments where hesitation is death. The quiet intensity of a predator who did not need to announce her presence to command respect. The fork in her hand fell to the plate with a soft clink, almost inaudible over the sudden quiet of the hall. In 40 seconds, everything would change. Collins leaned forward, still smirking, unaware that the small prank about to unfold would be the lesson of a lifetime. Don't be scared, he joked, nudging her shoulder once more. Her breath was calm, measured, each inhale and exhale like a metronome marking time. And then she moved. It was subtle at first, imperceptible to those who didn't know what to watch for. Her hands shifted, her body pivoted, and within moments she was standing, no larger than any other soldier, yet somehow impossibly dominant in presence. The 5 men tensed, instinctively realizing too late that they had triggered a storm. The cafeteria seemed to hold its breath, civilians and soldiers alike, sensing that a rare moment of controlled power had entered their midst. Chairs scraped, trays rattled, conversations froze. And in that calm before the storm, one thought struck the soldiers simultaneously. This is no ordinary woman. This is someone they are not prepared to challenge. She hadn't yet raised her voice. She hadn't drawn a weapon. She simply stood, unassuming, in the midst of a bustling mess hall, and yet, in that quiet authority, every soldier present understood that they had underestimated her. It was the beginning of 40 seconds that none of them would ever forget. 40 seconds that would teach lessons in respect, humility, and the raw, unspoken power of a Navy SEAL who required no words to command attention. And in those fleeting seconds, Chief Petty Officer Donna Rivers reminded the world, at least, this small corner of it, that strength was not measured by size, voice, or bravado. It was measured by precision, discipline, and the quiet assurance of one who had been tested in fire and emerged unbroken. As she stood there, eating tray abandoned for now, the 5 soldiers could only stare, their laughter extinguished, their pride crumbling, and a new reality settling in. They had just met someone who would forever redefine the rules of their world. The 5 soldiers had circled her table, brimming with cocky confidence, unaware that every step they took drew them closer to a lesson they would never forget. SGT, Collins led the group. His chest puffed out, his ego barely contained behind a veneer of humor. He leaned over her table again, letting his hand hover just above her tray, a silent challenge wrapped in bravado. So what's your story, huh? He asked, voice loud enough to attract nearby attention. New here? Or just hiding in the corner, trying not to embarrass herself? His buddies laughed, shoving each other lightly, but the woman didn't flinch. She kept her fork poised over scrambled eggs, her eyes calm, unbroken. The 5 men misread it as fear. That assumption, as it often does, would cost them. Maybe she's a medic, whispered one, leaning in close enough for her to feel the heat of his breath. Or one of those translators they bring in. Bet she doesn't even carry a weapon. Collins smirked and nodded, puffing up further. Well, let's make sure she knows we run this base, not her. He slapped the edge of her table lightly, testing her. We don't babysit civilians here, sweetheart. Still, she didn't answer. Still, she didn't react. Still, she ate. And that calm, that absolute absence of fear, unsettled them. Then came the fateful touch. One of the soldiers, perhaps encouraged by the group's laughter, tapped her shoulder. It was light, casual, almost joking. Come on, don't be shy, he said with a grin, unaware that the world he thought he controlled had already slipped from his hands. Her fork froze mid-air. She lifted her head slowly, deliberately, and met his gaze fully for the first time. Her eyes were not wide with fear, nor narrowed in anger. They were neutral, assessing, precise. The soldier felt a chill, as if her gaze had physically weighed him down. He swallowed hard and realized something he had never anticipated. She was not afraid. She was waiting. Collins leaned closer, oblivious to the tension now curling in the air. "You think you're tough? Hiding over here all quiet?" His smirk faltered slightly as he noticed the subtle shift in her posture. Her shoulders squared. Her hands, resting lightly on the table, were steady as stone. There was a quiet confidence in her that made him pause, but his pride and his need to dominate pushed him onward. Another soldier, trying to keep the mood light, laughed nervously. "Maybe she's just slow," he said, almost pleading for affirmation from the others. But Donna Rivers did not react to mockery. She did not respond to provocation. She simply exhaled, a controlled, measured breath, the kind of breathing taught in classrooms and reinforced in missions where hesitation meant death. And then she moved. It started imperceptibly. Her feet shifted slightly, almost as if adjusting her center of gravity. Her arms dropped, relaxed, but ready. Within the blink of an eye, she was standing fully, her presence transforming the room. Chairs scraped, trays rattled, and for the first time, the laughter of the 5 soldiers faltered. Something intangible had changed, something primal. The air itself seemed to thicken with unspoken warning. Collins, still grinning, leaned over her one final time. "Careful now. Don't bite off more than you can chew." Then, without another word, Dana executed movements that were nearly invisible in their speed and precision. Her first step was subtle, yet calculated, a shift that positioned her perfectly. A twist of her wrist here, a pivot of her foot there, each micromotion a product of countless hours of SEAL training. In 40 seconds, the entire dynamic of the cafeteria would change, and the men who had mocked her would find themselves humbled in ways they had never imagined. She moved with calm authority, never reckless, never loud, never shouting. Her hands guided each motion with exacting precision. In a sequence of perfect coordination, the first soldier stumbled backward, gently but decisively subdued. The second tried to react, but she anticipated his movement before he even completed it, redirecting his energy, ensuring he lost balance. The third lunged, perhaps out of desperation, and was stopped mid-step, feet planted firmly, but gently controlling the momentum. By the 35th second, all 5 men were disarmed of their pride, and literally on the floor, not hurt, not permanently harmed, but completely stunned. Chairs toppled, trays scattered, and a hush fell over the hall. Soldiers paused mid-bite, civilians froze mid-chew. The sound of distant clattering faded as every eye turned toward the scene, collectively holding its breath. It was in those final seconds that she revealed the insignia, subtle, yet unmistakable, on her sleeve, the trident of the Navy SEALs. The quiet authority, the flawless execution, the calm precision, it all suddenly made sense. The room's atmosphere shifted from curiosity to disbelief. The 5 men who had been so cocky, so sure of themselves, now stared in wide-eyed awe, understanding for the first time that they had just challenged someone trained to a level far beyond their comprehension. Collins's voice broke the silence, a whisper barely audible. "You're a SEAL?" Dana Rivers nodded once, never raising her voice. She retrieved her fork, sat down, and resumed eating, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. The 5 men remained frozen, sprawled across the floor and chairs, their egos thoroughly dismantled. Their laughter, once so confident, had vanished entirely, replaced by shock and an unspoken, dawning respect. The rest of the mess hall watched in stunned silence. Some soldiers whispered to each other, recounting what they had just witnessed, as if unsure they had seen it at all. Others sat frozen, trying to process the fact that a quiet, unassuming woman had just bested 5 trained men in mere seconds, without raising her voice or drawing a weapon. The 5 soldiers eventually pulled themselves together, each one avoiding her eyes. They shuffled to different tables, muttering excuses, their earlier arrogance extinguished. Collins, pride wounded, struggled to find words, but none came. For the first time, he realized that discipline, focus, and skill could not be challenged by ego alone. In that 40-second encounter, Dana Rivers had done more than defend her space in a cafeteria. She had dismantled assumptions, shattered stereotypes, and impressed upon everyone present, especially those 5 men, that true strength was not measured in loudness, size, or bravado. It was measured in skill, composure, and the quiet certainty of one who had trained for the worst and emerged unbroken. As she sat back down, resuming her meal as if nothing had happened, whispers spread across the room. Civilians stared. Soldiers stared. Some raised eyebrows in awe. Others simply shook their heads, unable to reconcile what they had seen. And all the while, Dana Rivers ate calmly, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips, knowing she had delivered a lesson far more powerful than words could convey. That day, in a dusty forward operating base cafeteria, the legend of Chief Petty Officer Dana Rivers began. 40 seconds of quiet authority had transformed 5 arrogant soldiers into humbled men. And the lesson, subtle yet undeniable, would ripple through the base for months. A constant reminder that appearances could deceive, silence could command, and true strength often required no announcement at all. The cafeteria fell into a rare silence that seemed to stretch on for minutes, though no one dared move. Soldiers, civilians, and even a few visiting contractors froze mid-bite, mid-laughter, mid-conversation. The clatter of trays and chatter that usually defined forward operating base kestrel had vanished. All eyes were on the corner table, where Dana Rivers had just demonstrated something almost mythical. Calm authority in motion, absolute precision, and the quiet but undeniable power of a Navy SEAL. Collins and the 4 other soldiers lay scattered across the floor in chairs, their pride shattered. The air around them seemed to hum with disbelief. For the first time, they weren't thinking about jokes, pranks, or petty bravado. They were thinking about survival, competence, and the unsettling realization that they had just faced someone far beyond their league. One of the soldiers, Private Jenkins, whispered, Did she just take us down without even yelling?" His voice trembled slightly. The others nodded, too stunned to speak. Their embarrassment was heavy, but it was quickly overtaken by something more profound. Awe. Dana adjusted her sleeve, revealing the subdued trident insignia of the Navy SEALs once more. It gleamed under the fluorescent lights, small but undeniably powerful. Collins finally found his voice, though it was low and strained. You're a SEAL." Dana met his gaze, calm and unflinching, and nodded once. That single silent affirmation sent a ripple through the hall. Soldiers who had not even approached her now murmured to one another, "No way, she's a Navy SEAL." Someone whispered, "I've heard of them, sure, but a woman? And here?" The realization sank in slowly. In a room full of hardened soldiers who had seen combat, who had faced dangers that would make civilians quake, the presence of a female SEAL was nearly unbelievable. And yet, there she was, standing, calm, composed, and entirely in control. The 5 soldiers struggled to their feet, brushing dust from fatigues and flinching at the stares of their comrades. Their embarrassment was palpable. Collins clenched his jaw, swallowing hard against the lump in his throat. He had faced challenges before, but never like this. He had mocked, underestimated, and provoked someone who had mastered skills he could not even imagine. And now, in the wake of 40 seconds of precision and quiet dominance, he understood just how badly he had misjudged her. The rest of the mess hall began to murmur in disbelief. A few of the more senior NCOs had arrived, drawn by the unusual silence. They approached cautiously, eyes narrowing as they took in the scene. One of them, Master Sergeant Holt, leaned down and examined the insignia. His brow furrowed, and then a slow smile spread across his face. "Well," he said quietly, "that explains a lot." The soldiers around the room exchanged looks of awe and disbelief. Some whispered to one another, trying to piece together what they had just witnessed. "I thought she was just another admin," one said. "I had no idea." Another shook his head. 40 seconds. And she took all 5 of them down like it was nothing. Meanwhile, Dana returned to her meal as if nothing had happened. She picked up her fork, scooped up some eggs, and chewed deliberately, slowly. It was a small act, but it conveyed volumes. There was no need for words. There was no need for explanations. The lesson had already been delivered, and it had landed perfectly. Collins finally spoke again, though this time his voice carried neither arrogance nor bravado. It was tentative, cautious, and tinged with a grudging respect. "Chief, I didn't—" His sentence faltered. The words he wanted to say, apology, acknowledgement, understanding, failed him. She didn't need them. She had already conveyed everything with her actions. Private Jenkins cleared his throat. "Sir, she's incredible. I mean, we all underestimated her. We were wrong." His eyes flicked to Dana, then back to the floor. The other soldiers nodded in agreement, some still too humiliated to meet her gaze. For Dana, this was not unusual. She had spent years in environments where ego, assumptions, and underestimation were constant companions. Being underestimated was a tool as much as it was a challenge. And when someone crossed the line, as Collins and his friends had, she knew precisely how to correct the imbalance, without unnecessary force, without spectacle, without humiliation. But even for Dana, the attention in the cafeteria was new. Never had so many people stared at her simultaneously, trying to process a single act of discipline delivered in such subtle, controlled, and powerful fashion. She sensed their curiosity, their awe, and their hesitation, and she let it pass over her like wind over still water. No emotion betrayed her, only quiet assurance. The 5 soldiers slowly picked themselves up, dragging chairs behind them, each movement hesitant, as if testing the reality of what had just occurred. Collins muttered under his breath, still trying to reconcile his ego with the truth. We should have known better. By the end of lunch, the legend had already begun to form. Soldiers who had been out on patrol together, who had known each other for months, whispered stories to one another. "Did you see what happened? Chief Rivers? 40 seconds. That's all it took. I didn't think anyone could do that." The words spread like wildfire. Even some of the more experienced NCOs paused in the kitchen, overhearing fragments of conversation. One of them, Sergeant Alvarez, shook his head slowly. "She's got discipline, composure, precision. Everything you'd expect from a SEAL. I've heard stories, sure, but seeing it? That's something else entirely." And for Collins and his 4 comrades, the cafeteria incident became more than embarrassment. It became a humbling lesson, an awakening. For years, they had relied on bluster, size, and bravado to assert dominance. But Donna Rivers had taught them, in 40 seconds, that true strength lies elsewhere, in skill, in composure, and in the quiet authority of someone who has been tested beyond measure. Later that day, in the barracks, the 5 soldiers would replay the moment over and over. Each retelling emphasized a different detail, the calm in her eyes, The precision of her movements, the subtle but devastating efficiency of every shift, block, and pivot. Words like unbelievable, legendary, and untouchable filled their conversations. And beneath the awe, there was respect, deep, enduring, and transformative. For Dana, however, it was just another day. She cleaned her tray, tucked her helmet back under the bench, and stood, preparing to leave the mess hall. No one challenged her. No one dared. The quiet authority that had commanded respect remained intact. She walked out without fanfare, but the impact lingered. Every soldier who had witnessed her strength, every observer in the cafeteria, carried the memory with them. That afternoon, whispers followed her through the base. By evening, a quiet legend had been born. The woman who had subdued 5 arrogant soldiers in 40 seconds. The Navy SEAL whose presence alone demanded respect. And though Dana Rivers did not seek recognition, her actions ensured it. From that day forward, the cafeteria was never the same. Soldiers who had once mocked quietly reassessed their assumptions. New recruits were told the story, not just as a tale of skill, but as a lesson in humility, discipline, and the power of unseen strength. For Collins, Jenkins, and the others, 40 seconds had changed everything. What began as an attempt at intimidation had ended in reverence. And for everyone at Forward Operating Base Kestrel, the legend of Dana Rivers had officially begun. A story that would be recounted again and again, inspiring awe, respect, and a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to be a Navy SEAL. The cafeteria slowly returned to its usual clatter, but the echoes of what had happened lingered like smoke after a fire. Conversations resumed, but they were hushed, punctuated with awestruck whispers. "Did you see her? She's a SEAL? I didn't even know women could be SEALs out here." The 5 soldiers who had confronted her remained seated at their separate table, faces flushed with embarrassment, minds racing to comprehend the encounter. Every glance toward Dana Rivers reminded them of how completely they had misjudged her. Her reputation grew silently, but steadily throughout the day. Soldiers approached their squads, recounting the 40-second incident, emphasizing details that seemed almost unreal, the fluidity of her movements, the calm authority in her gaze, the sheer precision of her control. Some could not believe what they had witnessed. Others nodded knowingly, having heard fragments of rumors about a woman SEAL operating in the region. Dana herself returned to her duties without fanfare. She was not there for recognition. Her calm, measured movements conveyed the same quiet authority she had displayed in the cafeteria. She walked through the base like a shadow, moving purposefully between tents, equipment caches, and vehicles. Soldiers instinctively stepped aside or gave her a nod of acknowledgement, no words necessary. It was only when Master Sergeant Holt approached her later that the story of her presence began to crystallize. Holt was a man of experience, hardened by decades in the military, and he had a keen eye for talent and leadership. "Chief Rivers," he said quietly, "we've heard. That display in the mess hall. Impressive. But who are you, really?" Dana gave him a measured smile. "I'm just doing my job, Sergeant. I don't need fanfare." But she knew the curiosity behind his words. And for the first time, the story of Dana Rivers, the woman Navy SEAL, began to be pieced together. Born and raised in a small coastal town, Dana had grown up surrounded by stories of military service. Her father had been a Marine, a stern man who instilled discipline and resilience in his daughter from an early age. She had been strong-willed, determined, and endlessly curious, traits that made her excel in academics and athletics alike. But she had also carried a quiet intensity, a drive to push beyond ordinary limits that set her apart from her peers. After high school, she enlisted in the Navy, initially intending to serve in communications and linguistics. Her aptitude for languages and cryptography quickly became apparent, and she excelled in training. Yet Dana sought something more, a challenge beyond the ordinary, a test of her physical and mental limits. It was during this period that she applied for the highly selective SEAL program, a path almost unheard of for women at the time. The process was grueling. Basic SEAL training was known to break even the strongest candidates, testing endurance, resilience, teamwork, and sheer willpower. Dana endured cold, sleepless nights, brutal physical drills, and endless mental challenges designed to push recruits to their breaking point. Many dropped out. Some quit. But Dana persisted. She adapted, overcame, and emerged stronger with every setback. Her instructors, men and women alike, quickly recognized her exceptional abilities, a combination of physical precision, tactical intelligence, and emotional control. Her subsequent missions remained classified, shrouded in secrecy. Yet rumors circulated in hushed circles, hostage rescues in hostile territory, intelligence-gathering missions deep behind enemy lines, and high-stakes operations where failure meant death. She operated quietly, without fanfare, achieving remarkable results while maintaining anonymity. Few ever knew her name, and fewer still had witnessed her in action firsthand. Back at Forward Operating Base Kestrel, her soldiers were starting to piece this together. Even the 5 men who had challenged her began to hear fragments of her past, whispered accounts of missions, murmurs from higher-ranking officers, and the cautious awe of seasoned NCOs. Each detail painted a picture of a soldier who had endured more than most would ever face, a leader who commanded respect through competence rather than authority alone. Private Jenkins, still shaking his head, turned to Collins. "I can't even imagine what it's like to be her. Everything we thought we knew about SEALs, about combat, about discipline, she's on another level." Collins said nothing, simply nodding in agreement, the weight of embarrassment and newfound respect heavy on his shoulders. Dana's presence had already begun to alter the dynamics on the base. Soldiers who had once been arrogant now approached her with cautious respect. New recruits whispered her name in awe during orientation, sharing the story of the 40-second encounter like a legend of initiation. Even officers noted the change. A quiet demonstration of leadership could ripple outward, influencing the culture of the unit more effectively than any order shouted or drill enforced. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the desert, casting long shadows across the tents and equipment, Dana prepared for her next duties. She moved methodically, checking her gear, reviewing mission briefs, and running mental simulations of potential scenarios. Her attention to detail, combined with her disciplined routine, made her stand out even among seasoned soldiers. She was not loud or ostentatious, yet her presence carried weight, the kind of authority that demanded respect without demanding attention. The 5 soldiers, now relegated to the back of the mess hall for reflection, couldn't help but replay the encounter repeatedly. Collins leaned back in his chair, muttering, "I thought I knew strength. I thought I knew skill. But I had no idea." Jenkins nodded solemnly, adding, "It's not just her skill. It's her composure, her calm." 40 seconds, and she changed everything. By the end of the evening, the story of Dana Rivers had taken root. It wasn't just a tale of physical prowess or skill with hand-to-hand combat. It was a story about mastery, discipline, and the quiet power of someone who had been tested, refined, and tempered in ways ordinary soldiers could scarcely imagine. She became an example, a legend, not just for her achievements, but for the lessons she imparted simply by existing in her role. In the days that followed, Dana continued her duties with the same quiet authority. Soldiers who had once laughed at her presence now sought her advice, her guidance, and her approval. Even casual interactions carried weight. A nod, a word, or a simple glance from her could shift the mood of a room. She had become a living standard of excellence, and her story spread, whispered in barracks, recounted at mess tables, and passed from one unit to the next. Collins, Jenkins, and their comrades began to change as well. The arrogance and bravado that had led them to confront her were replaced by humility, curiosity, and a desire to learn. They watched her closely, not to mock or challenge, but to understand, to absorb lessons that could not be taught through conventional instruction. Dinah Rivers had become more than a SEAL to them. She had become a mentor in silence, a teacher in action, and a living example of what it meant to lead through competence rather than ego. And so, the legend of Dinah Rivers continued to grow, a quiet force reshaping the culture of forward operating base, Kestrel. 40 seconds had revealed her power. The days that followed revealed her history, her training, and the depth of her skill. The soldiers who had once underestimated her now recognized her as something extraordinary, not just a Navy SEAL, but a symbol of discipline, precision, and the unspoken strength that comes from mastery over oneself. By the time night fell over the base, the story was already becoming part of local lore. Soldiers gathered in small groups, retelling the tale with a mix of awe and reverence. "She's not just strong," one said. "She's something else. You can feel it, the calm, the focus. It's like she's already 10 steps ahead of everyone." In that quiet desert night, as Dinah Rivers checked her gear for the next day, she remained unaware of the legend she had begun to craft. She was not interested in stories, recognition, or fame. For her, the work continued: preparation, readiness, discipline, and mission focus. Yet everywhere she went, the story of the woman who had subdued 5 soldiers in 40 seconds and carried the weight of countless classified missions preceded her, quietly commanding respect and inspiring awe. And in the hearts of those 5 soldiers, and many others who would hear the tale, the realization crystallized. Dinah Rivers was not merely a soldier. She was a master of her craft, a teacher in silence, and a living embodiment of everything they aspired to be: disciplined, fearless, and unfalteringly competent. The sun had barely risen over forward operating base Kestrel when Dinah Rivers strode into the training yard, her steps precise, deliberate, and unwavering. The 5 soldiers who had confronted her in the mess hall, Collins, Jenkins, Ramirez, Lee, and Powell, were already assembled, hesitant and uncertain. They stood in a loose semicircle, arms crossed, boots scuffed, and faces pale with lingering embarrassment. No one dared speak first. The memory of 40 seconds still weighed heavily upon them. Dinah didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone commanded attention. Every movement she made radiated control and authority. She paused in front of them, scanning each man with a calm, assessing gaze, and finally spoke, her tone even but firm. "You have questions," she said. "I'll answer them by showing you how to do better." The soldiers blinked. "Better?" Collins asked, incredulous. "We're soldiers. We've been trained." Dinah smiled faintly. "Training isn't just about knowing how to shoot or run or fight. It's about discipline, focus, and understanding your limits. You'll see." Over the next several hours, Dinah began a series of exercises designed to strip away arrogance and replace it with respect, not just for her, but for themselves and their unit. She started with physical drills, but not in the conventional, yelling at soldiers manner most had experienced. Each movement was deliberate, precise, and demanding. Push-ups, sit-ups, sprints, obstacle navigation, but every action was guided by focus, posture, and breathing. Mistakes were met with correction, not punishment. Her presence was the lesson. Her movements were the curriculum. The soldiers struggled. Jenkins groaned as he fell behind on a sprint. Ramirez gritted his teeth through push-ups that tested both strength and endurance. Collins, who prided himself on physical dominance, found himself humbled by the exacting standards Dana imposed. And Dana? She remained calm, silent, never raising her voice, letting their own efforts reveal weaknesses they hadn't known they possessed. Discipline, she said quietly, stopping to observe them, is about more than following orders. It's about controlling your body and mind, anticipating consequences, and acting with precision. If you can't master yourself, you can't master anything else. By mid-morning, sweat dripped from every brow, muscles burned, and breathing was ragged. Yet the soldiers persisted. They were motivated not by threats, but by curiosity, and by the realization that Dana was not merely testing them, but guiding them. Next came tactical drills. Dana paired them up for hand-to-hand exercises, demonstrating techniques with absolute control. Every strike, block, and maneuver was executed with precision. She corrected their posture, their timing, and even the mental focus behind each movement. Every misstep became a lesson, every hesitation an opportunity to grow. Collins, once arrogant and brash, found himself listening, truly listening. He watched her every move, absorbing details he had previously overlooked in his own training. Her calmness, her ability to anticipate, and her control over each motion impressed him more than any lecture ever could. By afternoon, the lessons moved to teamwork and coordination. Dana orchestrated exercises that required the soldiers to move in unison, anticipate each other's actions, and communicate silently. Each soldier had to depend on the others, and on Dana, to succeed. Frustration mounted as they fumbled through the drills, but Dana never scolded. Instead, she demonstrated, guided, and allowed them to internalize the corrections. You see, she explained, this isn't about dominance. It's about control. Mastery is quiet. Strength is silent. Humility is earned. And respect. Respect is mutual. None of you will achieve any of these without understanding your limits, and then pushing beyond them. By evening, the 5 soldiers were exhausted, soaked in sweat, muscles trembling, and egos redefined. They had been tested, challenged, and humbled. And yet, in that exhaustion, a strange sense of clarity emerged. They began to understand what Dana meant. Discipline wasn't just compliance. It was focus. Strength wasn't just force. It was precision. And leadership wasn't about arrogance. It was about guiding, inspiring, and elevating others. Collins, wiping sweat from his brow, finally spoke. I didn't understand before. We mocked you because we didn't think you could do it. But you've shown us more in one day than most of us will learn in years. Dana nodded, her expression calm but approving. Good. Remember this feeling. Remember how hard it was. Remember that humility and discipline are not weaknesses, but tools. Use them wisely. Over the following days, Dana continued her mentorship. She taught not with shouting, not with threats, but with demonstration. Every soldier who observed her learned more about focus, precision, and discipline than any classroom or drill field could offer. The 5 men, once arrogant and dismissive, became her most attentive students, absorbing every correction, every nuance, every silent lesson. The base soon began to notice a subtle shift in the unit. Soldiers moved with more purpose, worked with more cohesion, and approached each other with a newfound respect. The legend of Dana Rivers grew not because she commanded attention, but because she inspired it. Every demonstration of skill, every quiet correction, and every lesson in discipline reverberated through the ranks. One afternoon, after a grueling series of exercises, Collins approached her quietly. Chief, thank you. Not just for today, but for everything. You've shown us what true skill looks like and what it takes to earn respect. Dana smiled faintly, her eyes calm. The lesson isn't mine. It's yours to take. Remember it. By the end of the week, The transformation was evident. The 5 soldiers who had once mocked her now moved with a subtle confidence, a tempered arrogance replaced by awareness and respect. They had learned that discipline was not punishment, that strength was not loud, and that leadership was measured not by ego, but by action. Dana's mentorship became a story in itself. Other soldiers sought her guidance, even in small ways, hoping to glean insight from the woman who had redefined their understanding of skill, power, and humility. Her legend was no longer confined to the 40-second encounter in the mess hall. It now extended to her ability to inspire, to teach, and to elevate those around her. And as the sun set over the desert, casting long shadows across the base, Dana Rivers walked alone to the edge of the training field, surveying the soldiers who had once mocked her. They were no longer laughing, no longer arrogant. They were focused, disciplined, and changed. She had not needed to raise her voice or strike fear. She had simply led by example. In that quiet moment, Dana knew that her mission here was only beginning. The lessons she had imparted would carry beyond these men, shaping the culture of the base and the soldiers who would one day serve alongside them. And as she turned back toward the barracks, the legend of the woman Navy SEAL who commanded respect through skill, precision, and silent authority continued to grow. For Collins, Jenkins, Ramirez, Lee, and Powell, every movement they had made, every exercise they had endured, and every lesson they had learned became a permanent imprint. The arrogance that had brought them to confront her was gone, replaced by humility, awareness, and admiration. Dana Rivers had not just subdued them physically. She had reshaped their understanding of what it meant to be a soldier, a teammate, and a leader. By the time night fell, the training yard was quiet. The 5 men seated on benches, exhausted but enlightened. The story of Dana Rivers' mentorship had begun to circulate through the base. Soldiers whispered to one another, recounting her lessons, marveling at her skill, and wondering if they, too, could ever reach her level of mastery. And in the quiet darkness, Dana prepared for tomorrow, knowing that each day presented a new opportunity to teach, to guide, and to inspire. She was more than a soldier. She was a mentor, a legend, and a force that demanded respect without ever needing to demand it. The desert air was sharp and relentless as dawn broke over forward operating base Kestrel. The sands stretched in muted gold, broken only by jagged rocks and the occasional cluster of tents and vehicles. Soldiers moved purposefully across the base, prepping for the day's operations. But this morning was different. Today, Dana Rivers would lead her unit on a live mission outside, the safety of the base, a reconnaissance and security sweep in hostile territory. The 5 soldiers who had once mocked her now stood in formation, disciplined and tense, fully aware that what awaited them was no training exercise. Each man carried the weight of previous lessons, every muscle and mind sharpened by Dana's rigorous mentorship. Collins adjusted his gear for the 3rd time, glancing at Dana with a mix of anticipation and reverence. "We're ready, Chief," he said, his voice steady. Dana nodded once, her eyes scanning the horizon, taking in every detail: wind direction, terrain, potential ambush points. Her demeanor was calm, almost serene, but every movement conveyed precision and readiness. She had planned the route meticulously, considered contingencies, and mentally rehearsed the mission's challenges countless times. Today was not about proving her skill. It was about testing the soldier's ability to apply the lessons she had imparted. "Listen up," she said, her voice low but commanding. "This is not a drill. You will follow my lead, anticipate your teammates, and remain disciplined. One mistake could compromise the entire unit. Move smart, move together, and trust your training." The soldiers nodded, forming a tight formation behind her. For the first time, they were not thinking about ego, pride, or who looked tougher. Their focus was complete. Each man's breathing, posture, and attention mirrored the training she had drilled into them. Dana had transformed hesitation into readiness, chaos into coordination. They moved out, boots sinking into the gritty sand, rifles held close, eyes scanning the terrain with calculated precision. Dinah led from the front, not recklessly, but with every step measured, every movement purposeful. She signaled for adjustments with subtle gestures, a tilt of her hand, a shift of her shoulders, a glance, and the soldiers responded instantly, fluidly, as though anticipating her intentions. The mission progressed smoothly at first, the unit moving silently and efficiently through the rocky outcroppings. Donna's earlier lessons were evident. Every soldier adjusted to terrain, maintained discipline, and communicated silently when needed. Their cohesion was near flawless. The 5 men who had once underestimated her were now acutely aware of the stakes, operating with a level of focus they had never known before. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered. Shadows moved among the rocks ahead. Insurgents had been spotted, taking advantage of the terrain. Dana froze, scanning quickly but methodically. Her mind raced through possibilities, evaluating cover, angles, and threats. Her hand signaled a halt to the team, and the soldiers obeyed instantly, falling into positions she had trained them to hold. Positions, she whispered, low and deliberate. Eyes sharp. Remember your spacing. Move with precision. Cover your sectors. The insurgents began to advance, unaware that they were being observed. Dana calculated their movement patterns with almost preternatural skill. Then, in one fluid motion, she signaled the team forward, her movements precise, silent, almost imperceptible. The soldiers responded like extensions of her body, moving in perfect unison, their training and her mentorship culminating in flawless execution. Shots rang out, controlled, accurate, and decisive. Dana's leadership ensured every soldier knew when to act, when to hold, and how to move as a single unit. Collins, once brash and impulsive, now mirrored her precision, covering his sector with focus and discipline. Jenkins and Ramirez moved fluidly, communicating silently, adjusting positions, and supporting one another without hesitation. Lee and Powell followed Dana's lead with unwavering attention, their respect and trust evident in every motion. The engagement was brief but intense. Insurgents retreated, surprised and overwhelmed by the precision and coordination of Dana's team. Not a single soldier was injured. Every move was calculated, every action deliberate, every decision measured. 40 seconds in the mess hall had been a lesson. Today's mission was the proof, the demonstration that her mentorship was effective, her strategy flawless, and her soldiers transformed. When the dust settled, Dana assessed the team, her eyes scanning for fatigue, hesitation, or missteps. There were none. The soldiers had internalized her lessons, demonstrating skill, discipline, and trust at every turn. She allowed herself a small nod of approval. Collins exhaled, still catching his breath. Chief, that was incredible. We actually did it. We didn't mess up. We followed your lead, and it worked. Dana's expression remained calm, almost serene. You did it because you listened, because you focused, because you trusted your training and each other. Leadership is not about doing everything yourself. It's about enabling others to succeed, and today you succeeded. The 5 soldiers, once arrogant and mocking, now felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had not only survived a tense encounter with insurgents, but had executed the mission flawlessly under the most stressful conditions they had ever faced. Every lesson Dana had imparted, discipline, focus, humility, teamwork, had been tested and proven in real time. Back at the base, the story of the mission spread quickly. Soldiers recounted the precision of Dana's leadership, the flawless coordination of the team, and the effectiveness of the engagement. The legend of Dana Rivers grew, no longer confined to whispers about the mess hall. Now she was known as a SEAL who could teach, inspire, and lead under fire, a mentor whose skill and composure were unmatched. Later that evening, as the team gathered to debrief, Collins addressed her directly. "Chief, we owe you more than we can say. You've taken us from guys who thought we knew it all, to soldiers who actually understand what it means to lead, to follow, and to fight as one." Dana nodded, her gaze steady. "Remember this day. Remember how it felt to move as a unit, to anticipate, to act with discipline. This is what true preparation looks like. If you forget, it will show next time." The soldiers understood. They had been tested in fire, led by one of the most skilled and disciplined SEALs they would ever encounter, and emerged not only unscathed, but transformed. They were no longer the men who had mocked her. They were soldiers forged in discipline, humility, and trust, and their respect for Dana Rivers had grown immeasurably. As night fell, Dana checked on her soldiers, observing their readiness, their focus, and their posture. Each had learned lessons that went far beyond combat: patience, precision, and the importance of self-mastery. The mission had been more than a tactical success. It had been a profound affirmation of her teaching and leadership. And as she looked toward the horizon, the desert darkening beneath a blanket of stars, Dana Rivers understood that her work was far from over. But she also knew this: the 5 soldiers who had once mocked her had now become some of her most capable and reliable team members. Their respect was earned, their trust secured, and the legend of Dana Rivers, the woman who could command a team in battle with calm precision, continued to grow. The sun rose over Forward Operating Base Kestrel, casting a warm glow across the tents, vehicles, and training grounds. The base, usually a hive of routine activity, carried a subtle energy, a quiet reverence that had grown over the past week. Soldiers moved with a newfound purpose, glances and gestures sharper, footsteps measured, and conversations tinged with respect for the woman who had reshaped their understanding of discipline, skill, and leadership: Dana Rivers. The 5 soldiers who had once mocked her in the mess hall now stood tall, their shoulders squared, faces focused. Collins, Jenkins, Ramirez, Lee, and Powell had been transformed. The arrogance and brashness that had defined them were gone, replaced by quiet confidence, acute awareness, and unshakable trust in each other and in Dana's guidance. They had been tested in drills, honed under her mentorship, and finally proven themselves under fire during the reconnaissance mission. Word of their transformation, and the pivotal role Dana played in it, had reached higher command. Colonel Whitman, a seasoned officer known for his strategic acumen and discerning eye for talent, arrived at the base unexpectedly. He had heard whispers of a Navy SEAL, a woman whose leadership had altered the dynamics of an entire unit. He wanted to see for himself. Dana, ever calm, met the colonel at the training yard. She reported succinctly on the unit's readiness, their strengths, and areas that could be improved. There was no need for embellishment. The results spoke for themselves. The 5 soldiers standing behind her radiated discipline, cohesion, and confidence, a silent testament to her mentorship. Colonel Whitman's eyes narrowed as he observed the unit. He watched Collins correct Jenkins during a tactical movement, saw Ramirez and Lee communicate silently while adjusting formation, and noted Powell's unwavering focus on his sector. Then he looked at Dana. The precision, calm authority, and unspoken command she exuded left no doubt in his mind. This was a leader who earned respect through skill, composure, and mastery. "You've done remarkable work here, Chief," the colonel said finally. "This unit, these soldiers, have clearly benefited from your guidance. You've elevated their performance in ways that are visible, measurable, and profound." Dana's response was measured. "Sir, my goal isn't recognition. My goal is readiness, cohesion, and effectiveness. These soldiers have earned every bit of their capability. I've simply guided them." Colonel Whitman nodded. "Guided them, yes. But leadership is as much about guidance as it is about inspiration. You've proven both. I want you to know this. Your impact here will be remembered." As the colonel departed, the soldiers gathered around Dana. They were no longer tentative or nervous. They approached her with genuine respect and gratitude. Collins, now calm and reflective, spoke first. "Chief, we don't know how to thank you. You've changed the way we see everything. Discipline, teamwork, respect. Not just for you, but for ourselves." Jenkins added, "We were idiots before. Mocking, arrogant, thinking we knew it all. But you taught us more in a week than anyone else ever could." Dana's expression remained composed, but there was a subtle warmth in her eyes. "You've learned what I can teach, but the real work is applying it every day. Discipline, humility, focus. These aren't lessons to be practiced once. They are choices repeated over and over, especially when it's hard, when it's uncomfortable, when failure seems possible." The soldiers nodded, absorbing her words. The transformation was more than physical or tactical. It was deeply psychological. Where arrogance had once led them to challenge and undermine, confidence now guided them to observe, learn, and execute with precision. Their ego had been tempered, their focus sharpened, and their respect for Dana, and for themselves, fully realized. Over the following days, Dana's influence continued to ripple through the base. Soldiers from other units, hearing of the 42nd Cafeteria encounter and the live mission, sought her guidance. New recruits whispered stories of her skill, her calm authority, and her mentorship. Veteran soldiers shared anecdotes of her tactical brilliance and the quiet respect she commanded. In every corner of the base, her presence was felt, not through loud proclamations or displays of force, but through the subtle, undeniable impact of her competence. Dinah also continued to mentor the 5 soldiers personally, ensuring their development was complete. She emphasized mental resilience, teaching them to manage stress, maintain focus under pressure, and anticipate challenges before they arose. She refined their tactical skills further, running exercises that pushed their physical and cognitive limits. Each drill, each correction, each subtle gesture of guidance reinforced her lessons: discipline, humility, precision, and teamwork. The base leadership began to notice the change, not only in these soldiers but in the overall morale and efficiency of the units under Dana's influence. Operations were smoother, communication improved, and mistakes that had once been common became rare. Her mentorship had a measurable impact, and word reached other bases, spreading the legend of Dana Rivers beyond the confines of Kestrel. Even those who had not met her personally felt the effect of her presence. The respect she commanded was contagious, reshaping the attitudes and behaviors of soldiers far beyond her immediate team. She had become a symbol of what it meant to be a true Navy SEAL: mastery of skill, calm authority under pressure, unwavering discipline, and the ability to elevate those around her without seeking recognition. One evening, as Dana walked across the base, she observed the 5 soldiers she had transformed. They were coordinating with others, offering guidance, and applying lessons she had taught them. Collins adjusted a formation silently, Jenkins provided a tactical suggestion, and Ramirez ensured team members communicated effectively. They had internalized the teachings to the point that her presence was no longer required for them to act correctly. Dinah smiled faintly. This was her goal. Not admiration, not accolades, but the creation of capable, disciplined, and cohesive soldiers who could perform under pressure and lead with integrity. She had earned their respect, but more importantly, they had earned their own, and that was the true measure of success. The story of Dana Rivers continued to grow in whispered conversations, tactical briefings, and casual encounters. Soldiers recounted the 40-second cafeteria incident with amazement, connected it to the live mission success, and now tied it all to the ongoing mentorship and transformation of the team. Her legend was no longer a single moment of dominance. It was a continuous demonstration of skill, leadership, and inspiration. For the 5 soldiers who had once mocked her, the change was permanent. Collins, Jenkins, Ramirez, Lee, and Powell had evolved from impulsive, arrogant men into disciplined, aware, and capable soldiers. Their transformation was evident in every drill, every mission, and every interaction. They had learned humility, mastered focus, and understood the power of leading through action rather than ego. As night fell over the base, the desert air cool and silent, Dana Rivers reflected on the past week. She had tested, taught, and guided. She had faced arrogance, challenged assumptions, and transformed skepticism into respect. And she had done so without raising her voice, without demanding attention, simply by embodying the principles she had spent years mastering. Her legend, now firmly established, was not just about the 40-second encounter, or the live mission, or even the 5 soldiers she had mentored. It was about the enduring lessons she imparted, lessons that would continue to shape soldiers long after she left the base. Forward Operating Base Kestrel had changed because of her. Its soldiers had changed. And the story of Dana Rivers, the Navy SEAL who commanded respect through skill, precision, and silent authority, would be recounted for years to come, inspiring awe, admiration, and the pursuit of excellence among all who heard it. The desert night had settled over Forward Operating Base Kestrel, painting the sands in silvery moonlight and deep shadows. The base, usually a place of constant motion and noise, carried a quiet sense of reflection. Soldiers walked with purpose, their steps measured and deliberate. Conversations were subdued, carrying the weight of lessons learned and stories witnessed. The legend of Dana Rivers, Navy SEAL, mentor, and master of discipline, had become an indelible part of life on the base. Dana herself moved silently across the compound, checking on her team with the same meticulous attention she had displayed since her arrival. Her presence was not obtrusive. It was felt. Every soldier she passed instinctively straightened, every movement subtly adjusted to reflect her calm authority. She carried no fanfare, no arrogance, yet she commanded respect effortlessly, a living example of mastery through action. The 5 soldiers who had once mocked her, Collins, Jenkins, Ramirez, Lee, and Powell, now operated as a cohesive unit, applying the lessons she had instilled daily. They coordinated silently, anticipated challenges, and corrected each other with precision, never overstepping, never hesitating. Where once arrogance had dictated behavior, discipline and mutual respect now guided every decision. The transformation was complete. As Dana paused at the edge of the training yard, she watched them run through an exercise designed to simulate high-pressure field conditions. The 5 soldiers moved fluidly, covering each other's sectors, communicating with subtle gestures, and executing every maneuver with precision. Every adjustment, every pivot, every silent acknowledgement of responsibility spoke volumes. Dana allowed herself a small nod of approval. They had internalized her lessons, and she knew they were ready for any challenge the field might throw at them. Her thoughts drifted to the 40-second encounter in the mess hall, a moment that had sparked disbelief, embarrassment, and eventually admiration. It had been a simple act, executed with precision, yet it had set in motion a series of events that reshaped the lives of those 5 soldiers and transformed the culture of the base. The lesson had been clear. Skill, discipline, and composure could silence arrogance faster than words ever could. That moment had become a legend in its own right, repeated in whispers and conversations across the base, inspiring awe and respect. Dana's journey had not been easy. Years of grueling SEAL training, classified missions, and operations in hostile territories had forged her into the soldier she was today. Every challenge she had faced, from physical endurance tests to life-and-death scenarios, had honed her skill, sharpened her mind, and instilled a level of discipline that few could match. She had learned to operate under pressure, to maintain calm in chaos, and to lead through example rather than words. And now, those lessons were being passed on, silently, to a new generation of soldiers. The legend of Donna Rivers extended beyond her own actions. It lay in the changes she inspired, the respect she commanded, and the discipline she instilled. The soldiers she had mentored carried her lessons into every interaction, every mission, and every challenge. They moved with purpose, acted with precision, and approached life with the humility and focus she had taught them. They were a living testament to her guidance, proof that true leadership was measured not by authority, but by the ability to inspire competence and confidence in others. Even higher command recognized her impact. Reports reached Colonel Whitman and other officers, detailing the transformation of the unit under her mentorship. Operational efficiency had improved, mistakes had decreased, and morale had risen. Donna's influence had tangible results, yet she never sought recognition. Her satisfaction came from knowing her soldiers were prepared, disciplined, and capable. She measured success not in accolades, but in the readiness and growth of those around her. One evening, as Donna walked through the quiet barracks, she observed Collins sitting alone, reviewing tactical maps with focused intensity. She approached him silently. "How's it going?" she asked softly. Collins looked up, a mixture of gratitude and determination in his eyes. "Better than I ever imagined. We've learned more from you than we could have in years. You've shown us what it means to be prepared, to be precise, to respect ourselves and each other." Dana nodded, placing a hand briefly on his shoulder. "Remember, it's not about me. It's about the standards you hold yourself to and the integrity you bring to every action. Keep that, and you'll never fail." The other 4 soldiers approached, forming a small circle around her. Each expressed similar sentiments: respect, gratitude, and acknowledgement of the transformation they had undergone. There were no words of boastfulness, no arrogance, just genuine recognition of the impact Dana had had on their lives. They were no longer just soldiers. They were leaders in training, carrying forward her principles and lessons. Donna spent the next few days continuing her mentorship in subtle ways. She observed, corrected, and guided, ensuring that the changes were ingrained. She did not need to demonstrate dominance or skill. The lessons were already internalized. Her influence was quiet but pervasive, touching every soldier who came under her watch. News of her accomplishments spread to neighboring bases and units. Soldiers who had never met her in person sought her guidance, eager to learn from the SEAL, whose legend had grown from whispers in the mess hall to tangible results in operations. Her story became a symbol, a demonstration of what discipline, skill, and quiet authority could achieve. The base itself began to change, adopting standards and practices inspired by Dana's mentorship. Drills became more precise, teamwork more cohesive, and discipline more respected. Soldiers who had once been complacent or arrogant now moved with purpose, inspired by the example set before them. Dana Rivers had become more than a SEAL. She was a catalyst for transformation, shaping the culture of the base through action, example, and mentorship. One evening, Dana stood at the edge of the training field, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly before her, quiet and serene. She reflected on the journey, the challenges, the lessons, the transformations. 40 seconds in the mess hall had sparked the legend, but it was the ongoing dedication, the mentorship, and the silent influence that had cemented it. She had faced arrogance, skepticism, and doubt, yet her discipline and composure had prevailed. She had forged capable soldiers, inspired respect, and left a lasting impact that would endure far beyond her presence at the base. As night fell, the stars emerged, scattered across the sky like a reminder of the vastness and complexity of the world. Dana walked back toward the barracks, her steps measured, her mind focused. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, and new opportunities to lead, mentor, and inspire. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The soldiers she had transformed were capable, the base was stronger, and the legend of Dana Rivers had become a story that would be told, remembered, and revered. Even years later, when soldiers recounted tales of forward operating base Kestrel, Dana Rivers' name surfaced. Her 40-second demonstration in the mess hall, the live mission under her guidance, and the profound transformation of her soldiers were all woven into the fabric of the base's history. She became a symbol of what it meant to be disciplined, skilled, and composed, a Navy SEAL whose influence extended far beyond her actions, shaping the minds, hearts, and spirits of those who served with her. In the quiet desert night, Dana Rivers remained a figure of calm authority, her legend enduring not because of fear, not because of spectacle, but because of mastery, mentorship, and the transformative power of skill and discipline. Forward operating base Kestrel had changed forever, and the soldiers who had once underestimated her would never forget the lessons she had imparted. Lessons in focus, humility, teamwork, and excellence. And as the wind swept across the desert sands, carrying with it the whispered stories of a woman who had defied expectation and inspired awe, Dana Rivers walked onward, ever ready, ever composed, and ever a legend.